You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Hello, everyone. Hello, fellow systematic geekologists. Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. I am super excited about this particular episode because we're hopping in a time machine and we're going way back to the 1900s, where cartoons and sci-fi, you can make the case, was at their peak. And so we're going to talk about one of my favorite cartoons of all time, Space Ghost. And folks, just in case you're listening and not watching, we're not in front of a live studio audience. I got two friends with me to geek out and to talk about one of my favorite cartoons of all time, Space Ghost. And so I'm here with Christian and with someone he's very close to, Chip. And welcome, guys. Glad you're a part of this episode. And Chip is an expert when it comes to Hanna-Barbera cartoons and Space Ghost. Even ran a website documenting the history and the lore and each episode. And I'll tell you, I confess, when I was getting ready for this particular episode about Space Ghost, I was watching some of the cartoons on YouTube you can pull up, but then also had Chip's website up that Christian shared with me, kind of going through and looking at it. And this particular cartoon, we'll get in the history in a minute. Like it was like a year old. It only lasted a year, but there's so much involved, so many villains, so many planets, so many sci-fi lores. I can't wait to get into this. But before we do that, let's talk about what we're geeking out on and where we are today. Christian, where are you? How are you? What are you geeking out on?
I'm still up here in Louisville, Kentucky for seminary, and I am geeking out right now. I went up last weekend to go see my brother and sister-in-law and niece, and went to the library there now having a sale, which is very bad for me because I'm going to buy as much as I want to already hoard the immense amount of movies and books that I have. And I found all three movies of The Thing for $1. So I got the original Thing from Another World, 1982, and the 2011 version. So I've been geeking out on those.
Nice. Chip, where are you? How are you?
So I'm in the great city of Denver, North Carolina. And lately I have been replaying on Xbox 360 Arkham Asylum with Batman and finished that one. And
Nice. Okay.
just finished recently Arkham City. So I'll probably go ahead and work on the next one. But been watching some of the campy episodes of Brave and the Bold animated that came out a few years ago, catching up with those, which Space Ghost does make an appearance, by the way.
For an episode.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. What episode's that? I need to hunt that down.
It's just like one of the little 5-minute bumpers they have at the beginning of the episode. But I think it's in the third season, if I'm not mistaken, because I haven't gotten to the third season yet. So, and then I've been watching Ahsoka. Is that how you say it? Right. I haven't watched the finale yet, so don't ruin it for me, guys. Sorry. But I've enjoyed it. I see it's gotten a lot of criticism, but I don't know what people want. I mean, I like it.
Yes. I like that take, Jeff, a lot. Yeah. Star Wars fans can be a prickly group of geeks. So, and I consider myself in that part too. But it's fun. I don't think you can get as peak Star Wars as Episode 5 in Ahsoka. Man, alive. That was good. Good stuff. Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Will Rose. I'm still in Chapel Hill. I'm geeking out though. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to do some traveling with my family who is on fall break, and then going to go to Theology Beer Camp, and then I'm coming back home, and Systematic Geekology is going to have a presence not only at Theology Beer Camp, but also North Carolina Comic-Con. And I've been emailing back and forth the Comic-Con directors and panels, and we're going to have a presence to do a live podcast there. I think Joshua and Kevin and TJ are going to be a part of that. So pretty excited about that. And another thing I'm geeking out on, as I was going through YouTube, looking at old Space Ghost cartoons, I found Blade Runner Radio. Yes, it's just exactly what you think it is. It is Blade Runner ambient music that you can just hit play and hear some of the sounds of Blade Runner and music. There's no talking, a little background is some sci-fi flyovers of futuristic cities with spaceships. But if you're having a hard time falling asleep and you're a Blade Runner fan, you can put Blade Runner ambient music on and fall asleep to that. And I've done that over the last couple of evenings. So that is what I'm geeking out on. So let's get to the episode. It is time to talk about Space Ghost and all his lore that goes in with his place in terms of cartoons and Saturday morning cartoons and Hanna-Barbera. Hanna-Barbera, for those out there who aren't familiar with Space Ghost or aren't familiar with the lineup of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, just to name a few, here we go. We have the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Jetsons, Yogi Bear, Tom and Jerry, and then we're getting into my wheelhouse of Super Friends, Johnny Quest, Herculoids, Thundar the Barbarian. And then I think they're at the Mount Rushmore of Hanna-Barbera cartoons. You have Space Ghost. And so, I was going to go a little bit of the history of this. We don't necessarily want to read off like a Wikipedia page, but we do want to share a little bit of background about what this cartoon is and the pattern that he had. Chip, I'm going to let you take the lead here. What is some of the history of Space Ghost and when it debuted and how long it lasted? Then there was a couple reboots in there and reiterations. Some of you 90s kids may remember Space Ghost Coast to Coast, the Adult Swim late night talk show host on Cartoon Network. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the episode. But right now, we're going to talk about Space Ghost as it came out in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Chip, brief synopsis?
So Hanna-Barbera had a pretty good success with Johnny Quest, and they wanted to get into the superhero realm.
Mm-hmm.
The live-action Batman series was on, and they had hired a guy named Alex Toth. A lot of people say Toth, but it's actually Toth, to do a lot of designs for them over the years. And Fred Silverman, which was one of the producers for Hanna-Barbera, came in with a copy of Life magazine and had a picture of Batman and Robin on the front. And he said, "That's it. That's what I want Space Ghost to look like." And Alex Toth told him, said, "You know that space is black, right? And if we put him in a black, dark costume, he won't show up." So that's why they went to the white colors and then kind of outlined him in a white rim. But Space Ghost debuted in September of 1966. He actually ran for 2 seasons, went all the way to 1968.
Gotcha.
So he was a big hit. Now, I was only a year old at the time, so I don't remember that at all. But it was a big hit, and then that followed along and allowed them to make several other superhero that we may speak of as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And now each episode of Space Ghost, even though there is like 20 episodes and then a couple seasons, but within each episode, it had its own kind of 7-minute story arc. Did they have like a 3-parter in each one of these episodes? Is
so
that something
it was
that
actually
was going on there?
2 different characters. So you had Space Ghost, and then you had Dino Boy in the Lost Valley. So Space Ghost would be a 7-minute episode. Then it would be a Dino Boy 7-minute episode. And then they'd finish up with a second. Usually that had nothing to do with the first episode to finish the program out.
Yeah. And when I was a kid, I tend to do my timeline when Star Wars hit. I look at, I'm a Christian, so I do base history and time off like before Christ, AD, the birth of Christ. But in my fandom and sci-fi fandom, I do like judge things between after 1977 and before 1977, BSW before Star Wars and ASW after Star Wars. And so these episodes, this sci-fi cartoon happened BSW a decade before, and it really is kind of that campy kind of Bronze Age, Silver Age comic book superhero. You get a mainstay superhero with some teenage sidekicks and a cute animal, and they have the adventure of the week. And so they had a full story arc within a 7-minute time frame of an introduction with the narrator that lets you know where you were in space, and then they introduced a villain, and most of the time Jace and Jan and Blip would get captured or kidnapped, and then Space Ghost has to come in and save the day, and does, and then boom, we're ready for the next one. And each week they had or each episode has its own villain that they had to dream up, of these worlds and galaxies and different aliens looking differently, and superpowers. I think in one episode, maybe the early ones, they had a space sharks. Yep. They had space pirates. They had mind control. They had a living, an alien race that were bound down and worshiping a computer. You know, a little foreshadowing there of what's going to happen later on in the 2000s. But all that stuff is there, and so you can go back and watch these. And man, it's using the same sound effects and some of the same music that I was hearing in Super Friends when I was a kid in front of Saturday morning cartoons as well. I was like, that's the same music that I heard in Super Friends and all that. So it was all there packed in to these episodes. Christian, how about you? Where do you, how were you, I know how you were introduced to this through your dad, but like what was your first experience with them, and what captured your imagination with these episodes of Space Ghost?
I would have been very young. Well, you'd say like 6 or 7, maybe even before that. And Dad was, taping them on TV, and, he would always show it to me the same way. That's how I would watch the Spider-Man animated series, Batman, X-Men. He would tape, Space Ghost, Herculoids, Birdman, so on and so forth. And I was in love, like little kid, superheroes on my thing. And just keeping on, like for Space Ghost himself, it was that idea of this guy just, I like how you brought the contrast earlier of like the blackness of space versus the whiteness of his outfit. Like he makes an impression on screen compared to his surroundings. And he's got his power bands, just solving crimes across the galaxy. It was a blast. I mean, even as time went on, you get to the 80s cartoon, you get to the 2005 comic book miniseries that Joe Kelly did. Yeah. That, in my opinion, is darker and edgier done correctly. Mm-hmm. And his brief appearance on Brave and the Bold. Like, I love Space Ghost. I love seeing him on screen.
Yeah. Yeah, and so he is kind of like a Green Lantern kind of character in the sense that he's a space cop. He's a loner, but he has these sidekicks, these twin sidekicks, Jace and Jan, and their cute helper monkey who's there to help along, getting shenanigans and doing monkey things and bringing some comic relief. And they definitely laugh. It's not dark and gritty. He's not Batman where he's always brooding all the time. I guess we'll talk about 2005 comic book series and it kind of his backstory a little bit later at the end. But yeah, they're traveling through. He's from the Ghost Planet. That's the name of the planet, Ghost Planet. Of course, Space Ghost is from Ghost Planet. And then he's on the Phantom Cruiser, that's his spaceship that they're going around, and he has power bands that can shoot out lasers, sometimes as power beams, as fire, sometimes as ice. It has 3 buttons on each power band. I've only seen him press maybe 1 or 2 of them. I don't know, maybe there's different ways. You can correct me if I'm wrong. He has the Inviso power. They all of Jace and Jan and Blip and Space Ghost can turn invisible. Of course, if you're a ghost, some of your superpowers is going to be you can turn invisible and disappear from whatever villain you're facing as a way to trick them or figure out what's going on around you. I do have a question though, Chip, maybe you can help me. Some episodes, Jace and Jan have kind of jetpacks on that they can show them flying. Sometimes they don't and they're flying, but Space Ghost flies. Sometimes he just has that cape. How do they fly?
So I'm assuming his
have we got any
costume itself has built-in flight capability. Because when I was doing my research, it said that he can fly actually faster with his costume than he can in the Phantom Cruiser. I've never known that, but
gotcha.
That's what the research said. Now, do you want to know a list of all of the effects of the power bands? I've got a list.
Oh, 100%.
All right.
100%.
So
exactly.
in my research of doing this, so we have a reversing force ray, hypno force willpower, destroyer ray, Force Ray, Superpower, Destructo Ray, Pile Driver Ray, Energy Force, Stun Ray, Heat Force, Megatron Force, Magna Ray, Heat Ray, Freeze Ray, Freeze Force, Heat Intensifier Ray, Sonic Vibro Ray, Whip Ray, Frost Ray, Freeze Field, Scatter Ray, Power Rays, Antimatter Ray, Electroshock Ray, Battering Ram Ray, that's one of my favorite, Locking Ray, Hammer Ray, Megatron Ray, Energy Ray, Magnetic Ray, Laser Beam, Ice Force Field, Force Shield, Force Field, Viso Wall, Super Speed, Hyper Speed, and the ability to create a time warp. These are combined. Oh, yeah, it actually has combined powers. He can mash both sides of the buttons. Heat and Energy Ray at the same time. Force Field and Energy Power. Stun Ray and Force Energy Power. And then my favorite, raising the power to 5/5. So I guess he saved that for the worst.
Yeah, if you can raise it, if you can raise the power. And these are like not real bulky power bands on their wrists, like all within, like it looks like paper thin around his wrist. He's got some buttons, he pushes it and it has all those things.
So I always
together.
try to figure out how did he remember every combination for those that I just listed.
Yeah, he is definitely the older, wiser. He's the Space Ghost leading his sidekicks. He's been around the block a few times and knows what's going on. But I, just as a kid, when I was watching these things and capture my imagination, these cartoons, I would go out after Saturday morning cartoons and go pretend I was these superheroes, whether it's from Super Friends or Thundar or Star Wars. I'd have my imagination playtime where action figures, and I definitely wrapped some paper towel cardboard around empty paper cardboard around my wrist and colored power bands, and I was out in the yard running through the sand dunes battling villains and evil aliens with my power bands shooting lasers out of my wrist. So all those things you listed, I don't know if that was all in my head at the time, but definitely the imagination was running wild. Fantastic.
And I wanted to touch on something you said earlier, too.
Yeah, go ahead.
That it seemed to be Jan and Jason Blip getting in trouble, which is true. But a lot of time, instead of Space Ghost saving them, Blip, I think it seems like every other episode saves him because he turns invisible and is able to sneak around and, let Space Ghost free when he's caught. And it's amazing how many times that happens.
Yep. Yeah, and I love that kind of unassuming, small, unnoticed animal that. Oh, sorry, unassummed, small animal similar to the Hobbit or the mustard seed, or Jesus uses the small and insignificant is often that which is the greatest, or what happens there. I think happens within this cartoon. There is that pattern of them getting into trouble, but it's the small monkey who turns invisible, who can use his tail or do something that they can't do to save the day. So not just there for comic relief, but actually has a function within the 7-minute narrative and story arc that they're trying to use. Christian, what watching these, is there a particular planet or story arc or a villain that sticks out for you as memorable, or one that you kind of latch onto?
Well, storyline is definitely like the near finale of the original series, where he goes and actually meets the other superheroes, except for Birdman, I think, and the Galaxy Trio are like the only ones I can think of he doesn't meet. That would be the regular ones, but he meets Mytor, and also Moby Dick as well when they had that cartoon, right?
Yes.
Dad?
Yeah.
Was that one of them? Yeah. And Herculoids and Shazam, and teaming up with them, because I'm always a sucker for team up issues. Like I've said it before on the show, my favorite Marvel series of all time is Marvel Team Up. It doesn't matter how terrible the stories are. I just want to see Spider-Man and the Human Torch, teaming up with the Thing or whoever shows up that day. And that appeals to me even now. Like I can watch those episodes and go, yes, this is exactly what I want. I'm still that little 7-year-old watching it for the first time. But villains, it's hard to beat Zorak. I mean, someone who doesn't like bugs naturally, having him as a villain, well, you've earned my trust. Yeah, that's a bad guy right there. And how evil and maniacal he was, and all the devastation he would cause. And we can get into the comics later about how even more evil he is there with the way he abuses his own race to get what he does. He's kind of like almost a nihilist before the Annihilation comic event came out.
Yeah. You can see, Again, this is before Star Wars, but there's still in the zeitgeist of the day, sci-fi, pulp storytelling, exploration of science and the universe, and what could these planets inhabit? If there are a lot of planets revolving around stars out there in the universe, and they could have life, what could they be like, or look like, or be different than us? And they're wrestling. Perhaps their world is wrestling with the same things that we're wrestling with in terms of good versus evil, and we need cops and authorities to help police officers to help mediate and navigate people who are trying to abide by the law and those who are trying to break it. And so why wouldn't that happen in space and out on a planet as well? And so they're dreaming up all the different ways you could share these kind of stories of that. And so that was so appealing to me. Every single episode goes, of course, there's reoccurring characters and there's team ups with other Hanna-Barbera cartoon heroes and team ups. That's kind of fun. But yeah, the imagination that goes behind in the writer's room or thinking up how to do the animation of these different space aliens and planets and science and what it could be or not be really, really appeals to me. Chip, for you, what as someone who's studied this a long time and knows this really, really well, a big part of kind of your geek life and fandom, is there a particular story arc or planet or villain that's one of your favorites that sticks out?
The Council of Doom. It actually was the kind of the series premiere the second year. Instead of having a Dino Boy episode in the middle, it had a 3-arc story the first week and then another 3-arc story the next week. And as Christian stated, what they were trying to do is introduce the 1967 characters. So the Council of Doom comes together, and it's Space Ghost's biggest rogue gallery: Zorak, Brak, Spider-Woman, Metalis, and I'm missing somebody. There were 6 of them. Creature King.
Is it Creature King?
And Moltar. Yeah, Moltar. And so they're all trying to kill Space Ghost, and they're trying different ways. So he gets knocked into the past through a time portal, and he meets Mytor, and Mytor helps him defeat the monster. And then Space Ghost is able to teleport himself back. And then Jan and Jace are captured and sent to Earth. And then Moby Dick and Tom and Tub and Scooby have to save them. And then I can't remember who sends them to the Herculoids world, but then the Herculoids have to help him. And then they end up in the past where Shazam is, and then Shazam. So I'm like Christian. I love team ups, and plus it's a six-arc story, 6-part story. But it was used to introduce those characters that were debuting like the next week, or at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that was probably mine. And just the whole thing about Space Ghost in general. I was a big Batman fan when I grew up. I think my mom said one of my first words ever was Batman as a child. And nice. So I look at Space Ghost as kind of like Batman in outer space is what I look at him. And so sci-fi has always been I've been a huge Star Trek fan and a Star Wars fan. I mean, I love him. And, the Space Ghost being a hero in outer space. And then he's got all these cool gadgets, and he's got a great ship and all these powers and all these great villains. I mean, it's just, it just made me fall in love with him. But like I said, I didn't get to see it in 66 because I was just an infant at the time. So the first time I can remember watching Space Ghost was probably around 1976. NBC put him and Frankenstein Jr. together to have a show. And so they would show a couple episodes of Space Ghost and like one episode of Frankenstein Jr. And then I can remember in the 80s, that's when they put together Hanna-Barbera's World of Super Adventure. They would have the Fantastic Four because that was a Hanna-Barbera show in like 67. And then all the characters we've talked about already. And it'd be an hour-long show, and I'd just be sitting there enthralled. I'm in high school, and I'm still enthralled in this. And then, of course, when Cartoon Network came out, I was like in heaven because, for years and years and years, you didn't see these shows. And they came out with Super Adventures. And I just remember, man, I was wanting cable so bad. We didn't have cable where I was. So I went and bought a satellite dish, one of the first to get Direct TV. so we could watch all these things because we didn't have cable in the country where we lived at the time. And so, it was just great to be able to relive and watch these characters that I grew up with, again.
Yeah. Yeah. All you 20-somethings out there, let's just say there was a day when you couldn't just stream everything, pull it up on your phone or find it on YouTube. You had to wait for reruns or look for VHS or do DVD. When Cartoon Network emerged and started playing some of the retro cartoons alongside the newer cartoons, you would find us kids who grew up in the 70s and 80s, man, we wanted to see that stuff again. And I huddled around the TV every Saturday morning for Saturday morning cartoons, and then that was part of my deal. And so I loved the Super Friends, and I loved when Space Ghost and the Herculoids, they all teamed up and came together with those mashups. And I love those comic books too. The team books are my favorite because I love to see how they play off one another. Individually, they're great superheroes. They have great adventures, but when they come together and have to work together as a team to fight against a threat greater than themselves individually, that's very appealing to me. And so seeing the big crossover events with Space Ghost and others was pretty fun. And I'm a Batman fan too. I'm a big outer space and sci-fi fan. So yeah, you put Batman in space and have some adventures with his rogues gallery as well, then I'm there. And I love the campiness of it. I love what they're trying to do. Super, super fun. What do you think, Christian, is the appeal? What makes, we've talked about ways that we think this is special, but what is the enduring like factor of Space Ghost? What can we learn from Space Ghost in terms of systematic ecologists? We go a little deeper, philosophy, theology. There's not a whole lot of philosophy and theology within these things, but there could be. And so what would you say stands out for you if we were going to go a little deeper about some of the messaging and how this could apply to our own personal lives and faith?
Well, I think it's that whole, like, he has no real support that we see in the original series, and yet he himself has taken on a very thankless task of watching over the galaxy, protecting people from, we don't really know how the economic or political situation works in this world, but it doesn't seem like there's anyone who's really working as hard as him to make sure, this planet doesn't get invaded by Zorak or Brak or what have you here. And yet he does it. It doesn't seem like he gets paid for it. Like, no one's like having a Space Ghost parade for him, but like he's doing it because it's the right thing to do. And that's something that we can all learn when it comes to our own spiritual lives. It's like, we don't do things for accolades. I don't do things to earn a jewel on one of my crowns in heaven. I do it because God commands, do this because it is what I would do. So obviously it doesn't really seem like Space Ghost is a Christian from what we can tell here. But at the end of the day, that process can still be laid down at us. Like, we should act in that same manner. Our job is to look after others, no matter the cost.
Yeah, the virtues are there. It is kind of retro and throwback, this idea of duty, that you're called to something and you have a badge or a calling or an honor system. This is what I'm going to do. We don't get a full backstory in the cartoon in terms of, we'll get that in a comic a little bit later on, but like he why is he part of this Space Force? He seems like a lone ranger, and yet he has some sidekicks. He has some friends around him. He meets other people in the galaxy who are helping him. That it does take a team. It does take more than that, but yet he carries with him this kind of virtuous code of ethics that goes with him to make sure. One of my favorite quotes as I was watching this, there was this renegade comet on the loose. I think I forgot what the name of the deadly Comet is the name of the episode. At some point, the comet's chasing down things and burning them up, and Space goes, "That's the most determined comet I've ever seen." And I'm like, "Have you seen other determined comets?" It's the most determined. But yeah, he's like, he doesn't know where it's going or why it's doing, but he's going to investigate. He's going to make sure that other people aren't hurt by this thing. And he calls on Kid Comet to come help him do this, to work as a team. And so, yeah, you draw from that kind of virtue code of ethics. This is what guides my life, my moral compass, to guide me to do what's right. And hopefully at the end of the day, evil will be defeated until it rises up again. Chip, how about you? What's the enduring factor here in the message that Space Ghost gives us?
He has a high morality. He's just very cookie cutter kind of person. I mean, he's kind of, just an average guy, it sounds like, that just has superpowers. I like the fact that he's taken in, we find out in the comics that Jan and Jace are orphans. It doesn't really explain it in the show how he ends up with them, but, obviously he's taken in two kids to raise them as his own. So as an adoption, we always, hear God adopting us into his family. And then obviously he's an animal lover, a Blip. I never explains where we got Blip from, but, obviously he's one of Space Ghost's closest friends as well. Just the whole morality of Space Ghost. I mean, he always tries to do the right things, and he like Batman 2, he never kills.
Right.
He only stuns and then distributes to, intergalactic prison, so.
Yeah, I think, some of those themes that are there, and what I like in the comics is too, is this idea of family. There's blood family, and there's adopted family, and then there's family that you become as you journey together and struggle together and fight for what's right together. And so, what the idea that family sticking together, how do you grow into that friendship, partnership, teamwork? Family is a big part of that. So yeah, you do kind of, and there's some lighthearted stuff. They're not afraid to laugh. They're in the midst of a dangerous universe, out of control, chaos and villains everywhere. And yet something will happen and they'll laugh and like, yeah, isn't that funny? Or Blip does something, or they other things that they're not afraid to laugh and go through space and use their gifts for what they have for the greater good of the universe. So yeah, I love this cartoon. For folks out there who are listening that aren't familiar with the Hanna-Barbera cartoons or Space Ghost, yeah, hop on YouTube and pull some up and watch and have fun with it. I think it's fantastic. So we can't not talk about Space Ghost without talking about Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Chip, I know this might be is hard. Christian, I don't know about you and where you fall on that, but I will say that when that came out on Cartoon Network in 1994, I'm at the tail end of college, getting ready to go into seminary. I'm working at summer camp with a bunch of counselors. We're watching. Our sense of humor is growing and budding and stretching the boundaries. So when Space Ghost Coast to Coast comes on, and it has this kind of like, it's a late night talk show, weird, awkward moments where Space Ghost is interviewing musicians and movie stars and making them feel awkward with awkward pauses, and his Zorak and Brack and Moltar as kind of his studio helpers. For me, at the time, and I was going back and went down another rabbit hole of watching some of the interviews where he interviews Jim Carrey when he was playing The Mask. I was laughing. I was giggling. Brack, some of the music that Brack does when he says "Never trust a monkey," go back and listen to that one. I laughed out loud again because I even had that music CD, Space Ghost Coast to Coast music CD, where I'd play songs from the TV show. I remember going on youth trips with my middle school and high school youth. I was a part-time youth director, playing some of these songs. Some of the kids were laughing, some weren't. It was pretty weird, but that was my sense of humor at the time. Chip and Christian, what's your relationship to Space Ghost Coast to Coast? Again, no geek shaming. Everything's on the table. No wrong or right answer. Where do you feel about it?
I remember seeing that for the first time. It was like staying up late when I wasn't supposed to be, trying to catch like the uncut version of Dragon Ball Z that would appear on Toonami late at night. And then every now and then Space Ghost Coast to Coast would come on, and it's like, oh, Space Ghost, cool. And then I wasn't the proper age to understand what they're attempting to do with this. Yeah. And now when I do look back, because I have rewatched the whole thing since then, and it's just not for me. I'm not a dada kind of anti-humor kind of person when it comes to like that being really not the only source of the jokes they come up with in the show, but it's like a major force, as opposed to something like, Harvey Birdman. I laugh more at Harvey Birdman because it takes a deep knowledge of the characters they're making fun of and parodying from the old Hanna-Barbera shows that you see they do have an appreciation for them. So Coast to Coast doesn't really, it's not something designed for my sense of humor. I'll just put it that way.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Chip,
so
how about you?
I will confess, I've never watched an episode from start to finish. I've only seen clips. But if it gets people interested in Space Ghost and trying to find out who this guy is and gets them to the original, I was all for it. Like I said, I wasn't a hater. It just wasn't for me. And one of the reasons that I did the whole website in 1998 is when I did it. So, the internet's just kind of still in its infancy, I guess, even late 90s.
Right.
Wild West.
But I looked for something about Space Ghost, and I could not find anything except Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Well, that just didn't sit well with me. I was like, all right, so if these people love Space Ghost Coast to Coast, maybe they'll actually love the Space Ghost, the original Space Ghost. So that's why I created the original Space Ghost FAQ. And so started with that, and just went from, beginning to end. And one thing I got to do, I got to find a web hosting site and get that back up, because it's just got tons of information on it of all the Hanna-Barbera super TV heroes. I mean, it was just I put a lot of hours and time into that, and it'd be great for people to be able to see that. I mean, I know you can get on Wayback. Is it Wayback Machine, Christian? Is that how you get to it? And if you type in original Space Ghost FAQ, then it'll bring it up. Or you can type in Hanna-Barbera Super TV Heroes, and it'll bring up like the whole list of characters. Mm-hmm. But that's the reason I created that whole website, is I wanted people to know who the real Space Ghost was. So
nice. Yeah, I was Christian sent a link to me to that website, and I would totally support you rehauling it and putting it back together and putting it out there. Again, I think it's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that. Or hopefully maybe Joshua could put in the show notes a link to the Wayback Machine and some of that thing, because I do think you're right. Like, even when I went on Wiki to go look and see a little bit about the history of Space Ghost when they had it there, they're like, if you're looking for Space Ghost Coast to Coast, go here. If you're looking for Space Ghost, the animated TV show, go here. If you're looking for the comic, go here. So they're even like, people are looking for different ways. But I really think Space Ghost Coast to Coast was a game changer when it came to Adult Swim and how they did their own humor and the kind of using old school cartoon characters as parody and characters on its own. There was a lot of things that developed in the early 2000s that Adult Swim used because of the success of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, trying to capture the same success of that. And then it evolved to other things going on now in terms of Adult Swim. So there's a whole history there when it comes to Space Ghost and Space Ghost Coast to Coast and its humor. And, just as our different fandoms are different, all our sense of humors are different too. I mean, golly, Joseph Day and I had an argument about whether we like Will Ferrell and Elf or not. I think it's one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time. He's like, no, not for me. I find it extremely annoying. And we're allowed to have both of those opinions, in the same way goes with the other things that we geek out on. So that's what we try to do here at Systematic Geekology. So let's talk briefly about I'm a big comic book geek. Let's talk. That would be my recommendation, is if you like the cartoon, you have fun with that. Back in, I think it was 2005, DC did a limited 6-issue series of Space Ghost, and it's not necessarily the lighthearted Hanna-Barbera cartoon. It goes into its background, origin, and the art is fantastic. So Joe Kelly is the author. And then there it is. Chip has up on our YouTube page the single issues. I have some single issues buried in my boxes somewhere. I went to go find it, but it would take a long time to dig through those boxes. But I'm going to sort through my comics and give away 3/4 of my comics. But in the 1/4 that I'm keeping the Space Ghost limited series for sure. How do you pronounce the artist's name? What's the artist's name on that?
Oliveira?
Ariel Olivetti? I don't know. But man, it's like painted Alex Ross kind of pictures, and the covers are fantastic. It is so good. Christian, what's some of the background, or kind of the story that they fill in the gaps in terms of the Space Ghost story there, and the story, if you can remember?
Yeah, it's essentially our origin story for Space Ghost. We find that he is, married with a wife who is having a child, and he's betrayed by one of his bosses, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've read it. Mm-hmm. And it's his journey ending up on the ghost planet, and then figuring out, okay, how do I get revenge? And you start that story from that very dark and edgy, like, oh, I've been wrong, so I'm going to go back and hurt the world. It's a very kind of Punisher start at the very beginning. And then along the way, as things are revealed about the rest of the galaxy, the Zorak is starting to assault worlds, and he adopts Jason Jan, and finding, okay, I'm bent on revenge, but I can't let that control me, but this guy does still need to be stopped, and I'm the one who's going to be able to do it. And then two, we learn in this one, like Zorak kind of dies like how many times in the original series, if I remember correctly, from Spaceships Explained. Well, this explains how he's able to keep surviving, in that he essentially treats his race as a hive mind to where he can just take over someone. And he's the new Zorak after that. That's a very evil thing for a villain to do. It's very well done. Mm-hmm. And it eventually comes with Space Ghost, like, getting not his revenge, but protecting in the justice way of stopping his former boss from killing more people and stopping Zorak's assault from, like, essentially it's an annihilation wave. If anyone's ever read the Annihilation event from Marvel, that's going to take out all life in the galaxy if he doesn't do it. And then he becomes the Space Ghost we all know and love.
Nice. Chip, anything in there you feeling? You had the comics with you, you've read on what? Yeah,
it's definitely
it's a good run.
It's kind of like a Dark Knight Returns Punisher kind of feel to it at the beginning. You've got Space Ghost that's he's in an intergalactic police force already. He gets recruited into, I think you pronounce it the Eidolon something. And he finds out on their first mission, they're not what they appear to be. They're more like judge, jury, and executioner. And not only that, but whatever spoils are left, they take them. And so they're like dirty cops, basically. And he wants to expose them. And they show up at his house and kidnap him and his wife and basically kill his wife in front of him and his unborn. I don't know if the child was born yet, maybe an unborn child. And then throw him on the ghost planet, knowing that nobody would ever find him. Beat him up real bad. And so just leave him for dead. And he's found by a character called Salamon, who is the lone survivor of the ghost planet. And you find out that Salamon is the one who created the weapons that basically destroyed his entire world. And he tries to tell Space Ghost, or his name is actually Thaddeus Bach. We find that out. Space Ghost Coast to Coast, he was Tad Ghostal. And didn't he have an evil twin brother named Chad Ghostal, I think? So
probably did.
So anyway, his name is Thaddeus Bach, and he gets ready to commit suicide, and Salamon talks him out of it and tells him his story, and then shows him the Phantom Cruiser, shows him the costume, shows him the power bands, and says, "Look, you've got choice. You can use these for justice and mercy and protection of the galaxy, or you can use them solely for revenge." And so he starts out on his mission. He's like, I'm going to kill these people. Well, he does end up killing the first two characters that beat him up. But when he gets to the leader of it and going through all the things that Christian said with Zorak, he ends up depositing him to the organization that's responsible for that organization and says, look, here's the deal. I'm not going to do anything to you guys as long as y'all clean it up. If y'all don't clean it up, I'll be back. And that's kind of the end of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And yeah, I mean, that'll preach, in terms of, again, the great power comes great responsibility. Here, I'm giving you these tools. What are you going to use them for revenge, for evil, or for good, to make the world right? How are you going to use your gifts? And so
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, good story arc.
What actually changes him is he sees a vision of his wife and child, and she tells him how disappointed she is in him. And from that moment, he kind of, comes full circle and changes his philosophy because he feels like he's disappointing her memory.
Nice. Yeah.
And at the end of the story, he sees another vision of him, and she tells him how proud she is of him.
I'm going back to read this story arc. Yeah, I think, if you watch these cartoons on their own on YouTube and you're like, oh, it's so campy, it's 1960s, 1970s. But then it's like, if you want to get a little bit more real, let's go in there and read this comic book. Resurgent comic books were starting to make a comeback in the mid 2000s, 2005. And so they were really flooding in some good story arcs and bringing some people back in and a lot of fun. So has there ever been rumors? Like, I know there was a rumor there for a while that Johnny Quest was going to be made into a movie or a TV show and stuff. Live action Hanna-Barbera cartoons coming to life. They've made some Flintstones. They've done some other things. Has there ever been the idea of somebody like, we can make Space Ghost in this age of sci-fi and superheroes. Why isn't Space Ghost a streaming series or a live action movie? Has there ever been talk that Space Ghost would be a movie to the big screen? Do you guys know of anything?
So
I don't. I could look it up.
I have corresponded with several people through the website over the years. One of them was Lance Falk, that did a lot of work for Hanna-Barbera in the 90s. And he came up with a whole script, storyline to either do another animated version or to do a full-blown movie. And he even did storyboard art, talked about different people he would like to play the characters, and it just never came to pass. And I think people have tried and tried. It's like Christian and I've talked. I can't believe there's not a Batman Beyond live action movie. I mean, that's one of our favorite shows of all time. I mean,
yes,
we just can't believe nobody's taken that and said we're going to do that. But Space Ghost is kind of in the same boat. I mean, he's been around almost for 60 years now, and you would think somebody would take that, because I think it would be a great story for a movie, a live action movie. But at worst, I mean, let's get some more animated, episodes, with a more, not as campy as the 60s. We can be a little bit more, I hate to say it, we can be a little more violent now, and you can actually, beat up and punch people and,
Yeah. Yeah, the special effects and CGI and the world building, I think you could do a good one. I don't know why. I'll go out there and look for that. But I think James Gunn running with the DC universe and trying out some things, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Batman Beyond at some point, or building off those things. And maybe it's just Hanna-Barbera and kind of rights to things and how you can get it going, and it has a lot of age on it, and so people thinking it's relevant or not. I think with superheroes and sci-fi, man, Space Ghost will be fun. Same way they haven't brought Green Lantern in as good as well as they could or ought or should. But so that's my pitch out there. If anybody's out there listening that has,
we know 3 people that would go see it.
Big producing land. I'd be there. Man, I would be there so fast. I'd be there opening night. I love it so much. Good stuff, y'all. Other things you'd like to recommend as we get towards the end of here? Anything in terms around Space Ghost, or other things that you want to recommend for our listeners or those on YouTube? As they were watching this on YouTube, the lights went out in my office. I was sitting too still, listening intently to what Chip had to say, and so the lights went out in my office, and I can't get them to turn back on, the automatic light, as he was talking about the movie. So hopefully lights are not out on Space Ghost, that someone will cut them on and run with it. Other recommendations, anything out there you think people should check out as we talk about this subject and others?
And you can't go wrong with watching the other Hanna-Barbera superhero properties here we mentioned, like Birdman, Galaxy Trio, like My Tour, all of them pretty solid. There's some goofy campiness like that, like there is in Space Ghost too. Like, get over it. They're worth it. But really, ultimately, my recommendation is what we should do a next episode on, which is Johnny Quest, both the original. Then we need to do another episode on The Real Adventures. I love Johnny Quest even more than Space Ghost.
I love Johnny Quest. Man, there was a band in college too whose name was Johnny Quest, and they were kind of like Red Hot Chili Peppers, and we went to see them all the time. And I love that cartoon; it's so good. There's probably some problematic stuff in there in terms of depictions of other countries and races. But anyway, I think you could run with this Johnny Quest. That's why all those rumors were out there about doing a Johnny Quest live action. I think it would be great. But yeah, I'm with you. Chip, how about you?
Several things. If you go on eBay, you can find this is a big little book, Space Ghost and the Sorcerers of Civ 3. I don't know how much. It's probably $10 maybe, but a great story.
Okay.
Then you got all kind of comics. This just came out recently, within the last 5 to 10 years. This is a Future Quest series. It had Space Ghost.
Right.
This was just individual stories on Space Ghost, but then they actually did a Future Quest 12 arc where they brought in all of the Hanna-Barbera Super TV heroes.
Remember that too. I probably have those tucked away somewhere. Yeah, good call.
And then, of course, you spoke about Space Ghost being like a Green Lantern character. Space Ghost and Green Lantern had a team up. I don't know if you were aware of that.
I bet I have that somewhere in my box. I'm going to find these things.
And then the ultimate team up, Space Ghost and Scooby-Doo.
Yes.
So, Christian and I mean, it's still to this day, I watched it not long ago, the 2 episodes of Scooby-Doo Mystery or Scooby-Doo movies, the Batman episodes. And Christian and I used to love to watch those when he was little. So we've always enjoyed even the Scooby-Doo team ups. So we're big team up guys. And of course, this is a good one. If you want to know kind of history of Space Ghost, Toon Magazine, which is no longer in existence. This is issue number 3.
Oh, wow.
Basically goes over the history of Space Ghost, episode guide. I think it also does Space Ghost Coast to Coast as well. But, I mean, You can type in Space Ghost had all kind of merchandise back in the 60s that you could still go on eBay and find puzzles, coloring books. I mean, if you're a geek like me, I mean, of course, you have all these figurines up here. I've got several ceramic models and then several action figures. Now, one thing that was cool is you were talking about the 1980 Space Stars. A character that came out of that was Space Spectre, which was kind of the anti-Space Ghost.
Okay.
Well, I got hit up,
I
don't know, 15 years ago by a guy that said, hey, we're going to make a Space Spectre toy. How about send us some pictures of Space Spectre? So I went to that episode and, picked out little clips and sent it to him. And sure enough, he sent me a few months later and sent a prototype and said, here, this is what it's going to look like.
Oh, cool.
So I kind of semi-responsible for the Space Spectre figure in the Space Ghost line of action figures. So a neat kind of story.
I'm going to try and hunt that down. Yeah, I'm gonna try and hunt that down too. I think I need a Space Ghost T-shirt to sport around Comic-Con and stuff. That is a deep cut that I think, sometimes Comic-Cons, you have the mainstream stuff, but then there's people who try to go super deep cut with their T-shirts and cosplay to make people go, oh, that's cool. I haven't seen that before. So I might.
You actually could get a Space Ghost costume
some Space Ghost
a few years ago. I'm sure you can still do it today, but I mean, it actually looked pretty good. My body type's just not. My body type's just not.
I don't know how good I
look
look in tights right now.
Superhero look.
Yeah. Right now that my COVID 10 plus is not looking good for tights at the moment. But
But another cool thing is Christian loved Space Ghost so much growing up. I actually did an artwork for him, not by hand because I'm not that good of an artist, but off of a machine, kind of that you could project it on the wall and painted it, and it looked really good, hung on his bedroom wall for years. And then when we moved, his mom threw it away. Hurt my feelings. And I think one year for his birthday, I actually made a Space Ghost cake for him. So we've been geeking out on Space Ghost for a long time. I think we still
have the pictures for that one.
I love that. Cool. Well, my other recommendation would go Thundar the Barbarian. I want to do an episode on that and deep dive into that. So next we'll do Johnny Quest, and then we'll have Thundar down the road. That's it was my avatar for a while on Discord, in our Discord channel. I as a Star Wars fan, you put a cartoon with somebody with a sun sword, and he has Ukala, which is like the Wookiee, and then a space sorceress that looks like Leia beside him, and they have adventures in a post-dystopia apocalyptic world. Then yeah, I'm all over that. It's super fun. So I may deep dive that on some YouTube episodes and watch some of those cartoons. I love those. Those were great. And they had some pretty cool, nifty villains in there that, as a kid, I'm thinking back, they're pretty creepy, but super fun. Well, cool, y'all. Thanks for listening. This was super fun. I could geek out hard on this for a long time. It's a deep cut. It's retro. It goes back to the 1900s. But man, some of the things that happen within these cartoons and the creators behind it paved the way for other properties and IPs and sci-fi. All the, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and what they were working on in the comics bled over into Hanna-Barbera, and they worked together. There's a history with Jack Kirby with them too, sometimes using his art without letting him know or getting paid for it. There's that kind of drama behind the scenes as well, but they all played off each other, and the stuff that we love today, anime, sci-fi, cartoons, are all built from what happened with some of these stories. So thanks for listening, and follow us on our social medias. If there's something about Space Ghost or other properties you'd like to hear us talk about or deep dive into, let us know. Reach out to us. We're always ready to listen and hang out and geek out with you. We thank you for your support. Follow us and support us on Patreon. Subscribe to our network. And and always remember, the geek in me honors the geek in you.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.